Karol embraced what she called her Joan of Arc post-chemo look until her mother asked, "Why aren't you wearing your wig to cover up?" And she was offended by her husband's refusal to discuss end-of-life planning. He wanted Karol to keep fighting while she retired and prepared to confront an illness that would soon take her life. Nancy seethes at pharmaceutical advertisements and hospital commercials that feature joyous cancer patients. One particularly egregious example depicts two middle-aged adults on a bright red motorcycle with a wind-swept flag overhead declaring, "My cancer may have a powerful enemy, me." This phrase, Nancy contends, neatly combines the persistent metaphor of cancer as a battle with the familiar American narcissism of the can-do self. That notion that you are responsible for healing from your disease reinforces the idea that you are responsible for having it in the first place. You gave yourself cancer. Now take it away. Nancy and Karol were part of a support group also attended by author and professor Dr. Susan Gubar, who writes about her experience in a column for the New York Times called Living with Cancer. Dr. Gubar explains that the righteous indignation Susan and Karol and so many others express about their families and the gargantuan healthcare and pharmaceutical machines reflects the flip side of a roiling fear that the disease instills in patients and also in caregivers. Anger, she believes, is how many patients deal with panic about loss of control, fear of mutilation and pain, and grief over disability and mortality. Illness immerses its victims in a frightful not knowing, and Dr. Gubar defends anger as a cathartic response that channels misery and frustration. Anger has a bad rap. Female anger conjures threatening archetypes of the harpy and her talons, the witch and her spells, Medusa and her writhing locks. Male anger evokes images of rapists, serial killers, and lone gunmen. Because of a few indelible stereotypes, anger has been written off as dangerous and criminal, selfish and unhealthy. But anger is a primary color in our emotional palette, and we cannot paint our lives without it. Anger unveils the truth by giving forceful expression to our fear, our vulnerability, and even our hope. The question is not whether we have permission to be angry. Of course we do. At this season of reckoning, the real question is how we will deploy our anger toward healing and repair, toward change and accountability. I have spent much of the year thinking about anger, in particular, how anger in women is so frowned upon that my own rage is cordoned off in a closely monitored sphere of observation rather than expression. My fury at the state of the world is kept at a whisper, only rarely expressed to close confidants, and even then, I still worry about appearing like a loose cannon. A few days ago, I was leading Shabbat morning tefillah with Cantor DeLoe. During the Hakafah, as we paraded around the congregation with the Torah scroll greeting worshipers, a visitor stopped me and said, "You girls are doing a great job." I know his intentions were generous, but neither Cantor DeLoe nor I is a girl. We are grown women, we are professionals, we are clergy, and we do not solicit worship feedback during worship. Outwardly, I thanked this man for his compliment, but in my head I fumed, "Hey buddy, I'm not a girl, I'm your rabbi." On a very different scale, every time I read about a mass shooting, In between Memorial Day and Labor Day of this year alone, there were 26 mass shootings in 18 states. Every time I read about a mass shooting, I want to tear apart the newspaper and blast the furious confetti at our criminally negligent lawmakers. As I pace my study or my apartment, places where I can privately vent my fury, I simmer with rage at reckless politicians who shirk their civic obligations, hiding behind empty platitudes of thoughts and prayers. The exploitation of prayer as a valid strategy to battle the evils of unrestricted access to firearms in this country is offensive to me as a Jew, as a rabbi, and as a believer in God. How dare anyone place this scourge at the footsteps of the Holy One? We are guilty, and only we can legislate the safety of our fellow Americans. I burn with resentment at the national conversation. I attend the March for Our Lives, and I walk through life wrapped in a blanket of fear that a bullet will one day pierce the body of my precious son. There are physical and emotional tolls to anger. Feelings of anxiety and stress, guilt and shame, not to mention hypertension, headaches, and insomnia. I seek guidance from our tradition. What should I do with this fury that I feel? Can good come of such harsh feelings? Can such passion drive meaningful change? Our scriptures are multivocal about anger, but it is easiest to find condemnation. Talmud asserts that God loves three kinds of people: those who don't get angry, those who don't get drunk, and those who don't stand on ceremony. And 11th century jurist Moses Maimonides wrote in his seminal law code, Mishnah Torah, one who becomes angry is as though that person has worshipped idols. Anger is easily vilified in our sacred texts. Interestingly, when God rages at the Israelites for worshiping the golden calf, threatening to destroy the stiff-necked people, Moses exhorts, "Let not your anger, Adonai, blaze forth against your people whom you delivered from the land of Egypt. Let not the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that God delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people." Now, according to Maimonides, God's fury at the Israelites is just as idolatrous as their idol worship. Moses successfully steers God away from destructive impulses, but he too rages at the Israelites' betrayal. While they survive this cardinal transgression, Moses descends Mount Sinai and smashes the Ten Commandments. Midrashic tradition tells us that Moses shattered the stone tablets on the 17th of Tammuz, a fast day. He reascended Mount Sinai on the 1st of Elul, the beginning of our month of introspection. And only on Yom Kippur did he descend the mountain once again with a new set of tablets, not inscribed by God, but by his own hand. Moses exercises leadership in numerous ways. He diffuses God's lethal rage. He conveys God's indignation and his directly to the Israelites so they know the error of their ways. And he gives them time to do the challenging work of rebuilding themselves and their community in the wake of their iniquity. In the story of the broken tablets, we have the first example of communal teshuvah, and it is precipitated by the expression of divine and human anger. It is easy to revile anger as harmful and idolatrous when it leads to violence and oppression, but what about the righteous anger of Moses? Clearly, not all anger is destructive. Author Rebecca Traister writes, "What I have glimpsed in the moments when I have let myself give voice to the deep, rich, curdled fury that for years I tried to pretty up and make easier on everyone's stomach, is that for all the care we take to bottle it up, rage can be a powerful tonic. It is a communicative tool which speakers and writers and activists not only find freeing, but which acts as a balm to listeners and readers struggling with their own subsumed vexations. Philosopher Maisha Cherry helpfully characterizes another powerful and necessary form of anger at injustice. This anger recognizes wrongdoing. It's not selfish. When someone is angry at injustice, they're not just concerned with themselves, but with other people. This anger doesn't violate others' rights, and most importantly, it desires change. Moses' anger is a communicative tool that also desires change. In shattering the precious tablets of the law, he alerts the Israelites to a profound rupture in their relationship with him and with God. And in ascending Mount Sinai once again to procure a new set, Moses signals hope for reconciliation. The phrase for kindling anger in Torah is haron af, literally the burning of the nose. Emotion, our text tells us, is not abstract, it is embodied. Anger can be felt in the center of our faces, therefore it cannot and should not be ignored. Anger doesn't have to be wild and threatening. In fact, we would do well by our families, communities, and society writ large if we learned how to harness our indignation toward progress. Contemporary psychologists argue that anger can be constructive, empowering us as we pursue our goals. Anger expressed in intimate relationships clearly identifies problems and helps us find solutions. Anger can motivate self-change and even reduce violence as a strong social signal that a problem requires resolution. Atara Cohen writes that as a child, she internalized the belief that anger was sinful and shameful. Now, as a rabbinical student, she argues for more representation and acknowledgement of God's anger, which can give permission or even encouragement to embrace anger on a human level. Just as God's wrath is consuming and burning to result in a better world, so too can humans destroy oppressive systems in order to enact positive change. In Exodus, God's wrath is on full display. But even more poignantly, perhaps, a 9th century midrash depicts God as the object of angry reproach. In a dialogue between God and the personified female Jerusalem, God attempts to console her for the destruction of the temple. God offers to comfort Jerusalem, and she responds, "I will not receive comfort from you until we speak rebuke." Jerusalem refuses consolation until God admits wrongdoing and concedes that Jerusalem is right. She takes the loving relationship God offers and turns it into one of censure, and God accepts. This midrash not only condones anger, but directing that anger at any injustice, even if that injustice comes from God. Anger, our tradition tells us, resists complacency. Like a personified Jerusalem, we can demand and shape a better world. So, what are we mad about? And how do we harness our rage toward progress? First, we must examine the roots of our anger. We are all furious at the driver who stole our parking spot or the stranger who told us our child wasn't dressed warmly enough. Hopefully, the sparks that fly in these relationship-less interactions evanesce quickly. There's no love there, only the frustration of being judged or delayed. If we look past the outrage we easily express in our cars and on the street to the more private kinds of anger, the subsumed vexation simmering in our souls, we find relationship. I'm furious at my ex-wife and the way she's pitting my children against me as we navigate divorce. Anger at separation and triangulation. I cannot believe the audacity of my father's doctor who gave him a prognosis with so little hope, so little sensitivity. Anger at painful news. Our son won't tear himself away from his cell phone long enough to acknowledge our existence, nevertheless express appreciation for all we do for him. Anger at ingratitude. I feel so alone. I pray and there's no listener and no answer. Now God ignores me. Anger at abandonment. In our most sacred relationships, psychologists insist, anger must be addressed directly with the party that wounds us. As Jerusalem models in the Midrash, I will not receive comfort until we speak rebuke. We can be brave in admitting our disappointment, that we feel manipulated or scared, ignored, or alone. Giving voice to the pain that lies beneath our fury invites those who hurt us to see past blame to our vulnerability. This expression of anger signals that there has been a breach and repair is required. Yom Kippur reminds us that anger is not a permanent state of relationship. The fuel which fires our fury must also be used to seek reconciliation. Any meaningful path of anger has a terminus with forgiveness. Anger is an invitation into teshuvah. And what about anger that extends beyond our relationships to the world? So much of my own fury has bloomed out of fear. Fear of that bullet taking my son. Fear of global warming starving his generation. Fear of the pervasive culture of sexual violence in this country. The list goes on. Just last month, 16-year-old environmental activist from Sweden, Greta Sundberg, modeled what anger at global injustice looks like. At the United Nations Climate Summit, she accused her audience, "You all come to us young people for hope? How dare you? You've stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?" For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? There will not be any solutions or plans presented today because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you're still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us. Thunberg, who correctly believes that the inaction of previous generations has cost her future, is following in the footsteps of other activists whose loss and fear propelled them to demand change. Candy Leitner founded Mothers Against Drunk Driving after her 13-year-old daughter was struck and killed by a drunk driver. She refused to live in a world where death caused by drunk drivers is the only socially acceptable form of homicide. Emma Gonzalez, a survivor of the deadliest school shooting in United States history, channeled her anger into a 4-syllable accusation of lawmakers, "We call BS," that became a rallying cry for gun control activists. At the March for Our Lives, Gonzalez's anger imbued a lengthy moment of silence that recalled the time it took for the assailant to murder 14 classmates and 3 staff in her high school. In the wake of the shooting, the state of Florida passed the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, raising the age to purchase guns from 21 from 18, banning bump stocks, and empowering law enforcement to take guns from those deemed a threat to themselves and others. Grief and loss and fear, the drivers of our fiercest anger, can change the world, inflaming an entire generation to rally for progress. The anger of Greta and Emma and Candy forces us to question the oppressive structures that victimize too many. Their rage is a call to action we cannot ignore. Like Moses, they are smashing the tablets of the systems we've inherited and demanding that we ascend Mount Sinai together for justice. Tomorrow morning, we read Parshat Nitzavim, a desperate appeal from God via Moses to the Israelites as they prepare to enter the Holy Land. Ha'idoti v'chem hayom et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, ha'chayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha, ha'bracha v'ha'klala, uv'acharta b'chayim, lema'an tehiyeh ata v'zarecha. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life, that you and your descendants shall live. Choosing life means living into all the colors of our experience, including the deep red fury that inflames our souls. We have permission to be angry. The option between blessing and curse means evolving past our indignation toward forgiveness or social action. Cursed rage can be violent and destructive. It can oppress the vulnerable, tyrannize our partners, muzzle identities, and make us sick. But the anger of blessing is liberating and healthy, a powerful tonic that fortifies us as we lean into fractured relationships and crusades for justice. Dr. Susan Gubar found a sacred community of cancer patients where her honest anger and theirs fostered connections and built trust. Emma Gonzalez proved that the language and the silence of anger can unite millions in the fight for gun control. Greta Sundberg has shown the power of rebuke, what we call tochacha, in her call for meaningful political action on climate change. Millions of citizens are marching their anger, voting their fury, writing their indignation in letters to Congress and opinion editorials, and campaigning for public office on their ravenous appetite for change. And what about us? How will we use our silence and our anger and our tochacha? How will we choose life by honoring the full rainbow complexity of our humanness and our pervasive challenges? I hope we find the strength to be like Jerusalem, brave enough to address the causes of our anger all the way up to the God who created this imperfect world and made us her stewards. And on this Yom Kippur, I pray that along with greater tolerance of and engagement with our anger comes a strong desire for reconciliation with those who hurt us. Anger is a tool, and we deploy it most successfully when it leads us on the path of teshuvah, seeking and bestowing pardon. There is Torah in our burning noses, and it can liberate us to mend our broken world and our broken hearts.